Hey everyone, I'm DC Rutledge, and this is Two Hard Questions. In this episode, we're going to discuss the mainstream media's obsession with polling. If it seems like you've been inundated with Democratic primary nomination polling data nearly every day for the past year, you're not wrong. Those polls have been commissioned and circulated since before the 2018 midterm elections by corporate mainstream media outlets. The public domain has been completely saturated with them, and people's perceptions of a candidate's popularity and quote-unquote electability are, by design, deeply influenced by them. But these corporate media outlets have multiple ulterior motives in constantly spreading their often misleading polling results to the masses. And that's what we'll be looking at in this episode of Two Hard Questions. First, let's talk about how the mainstream media uses manipulative polling methodology to create and instill their desired narrative into the public consciousness. When looking at any poll, the most important pieces of information are found in the methodology section. If you ever see a poll that doesn't have one or that has very few details, that should be a big red flag. Why? Because polling results are completely reliant on the methodology used. For example, let's assume I'm a nefarious pollster and I want to artificially produce polling results that favor one candidate over another. Say, hypothetically, I know my favored candidate performs better with older voters, whereas the other candidate does better with younger voters. There are a couple easy ways I can manipulate this poll's methodology to produce my desired results. First, I could conduct the polling calls to an even 50-50 split between landlines and cell phones. Sounds fair enough, right? But think about it. Which age group predominantly uses landline phones? Older people. Which age group predominantly uses cell phones? Older people and younger people, because cell phones are ubiquitous. My grandparents' primary phone is their cell phone, and they're in their 80s. So, by doing something that on its face seems fair enough, I'd actually be generating a much larger sample of older voters. Another easy way to skew my sample older is to only use data from, quote, likely primary voters. Again, this seems like it should increase the accuracy of the poll's results, right? But what I'm not telling you is that by likely primary voter, what I mean is someone who has voted in a particular party's primary election for the past 2 or sometimes even 3 consecutive presidential cycles. Put another way, I'm saying you need to have been at least 18 years old in 2012, and you need to have voted in one party's presidential primary election in both 2012 and 2016 in order for your responses to be included in the data. Right off the bat, this excludes many younger voters, ages 18 to 26 years old. Also, historically, which age group votes most consistently in primary elections? You guessed it, older voters. Throw on top of that the fact independent political affiliation skews more towards younger voters, plus the fact that independents are excluded from participating in many closed primary states. And it's all the better for me, the nefarious pollster, and my desired results. Those are just a couple quick examples of how easy it is to manipulate polling results. And I guarantee you most people don't pay attention to the methodology and are therefore themselves easily manipulated by the polls. Not to mention, most people hear about these polls from the stable of mainstream media talking heads who promote them as gospel ad nauseum until voila, the electability narrative of a desired candidate is born. And that leads us to talk about the reasons why the mainstream media is obsessed with polling. As I mentioned, polls allow for effective narrative creation, especially concerning perceived electability, but they also allow for narrative suppression. Polls typically have many different data points, and any one of them can be used to support the narrative the talking heads want while obscuring the narrative they don't. They can just focus on and repeat the part of the poll that best supports their narrative. And that's exactly what they do.
With New Hampshire's polling saying your neighboring state that Joe Biden is 2-1 ahead, is there a point where you start going after Joe Biden? Will you confront him in the debates? Will you confront him to show the difference between Biden and Bernie?
Well, Al, if you look at that particular poll, they had 2/3 of the people that they reached out to were over the age of 50, and that's not the way the people in New Hampshire vote. I think it was a selection of older people, which is not accurate.
The other big reason mainstream media loves polling is due to so-called horse race politics. It's an attempt to turn politics into a sport or a reality TV show, two of the most popular forms of entertainment in this country. It also gives them something to talk about so they don't have to talk about substantive issues that affect everyday Americans. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Who's falling? Who's rising? Who should I bet on? It's all meant to distract you from the real questions you should be asking. Which policy proposals will most improve our society? Which candidate do you trust will fight for those policies? And which candidate is building a movement that can create the change that you want to see? So here's the main takeaway. For many reasons, polls this early on are almost entirely unreliable in depicting national voter sentiment and predicting election outcomes. Over 136 million Americans cast a ballot in the 2016 general election, which is still only a little over half of all eligible voters. 30 million voters participated in the Democratic primary election that year, which isn't even a quarter of the general election voters. And roughly 9 million people watched the last round of the Democratic primary debates this year. That's less than 1/3 of Democratic primary voters. The point is, the vast majority of voters are not really paying attention this early on. Most won't start paying attention until the primaries are all but over. And no realistic kind of sample can be representative of the broader electorate until they do. I know that might blow the minds of my fellow political junkies, but it's true. But that's also why the mainstream media is so invested in creating these narratives. They're insidious. They creep into the public subconscious with a soundbite here or a glance at a leaderboard there, until by the time primary dates are on the horizon, unsuspecting voters have been conditioned to respond to electability cues in favor of one candidate over another. It's inception on a national scale. So if you want a better look at how a candidate's campaign is doing that doesn't rely on misleading and erratic polls, look at the number of individual donors and look at the number of volunteers for their campaign. Those are the true indicators of a candidate's electability. The rest is just an entertaining distraction. Thanks for watching this episode of Two Hard Questions. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can catch every episode. Until next time, peace.